So I've come to Calton Hill, and what do you know, glorious sunshine. You get some fantastic views up here. There's this sort of iconic view of Edinburgh, looking across to the castle and along Princes Street. So I'm going to work with that first, but I'm also quite interested in some of the other maybe less obvious views, looking across to the Pentlands, and I'll go around the other side because there is some great almost aerial views of Princes Street. Of course, I've brought with me my viewfinder, so that's a good way to start. I think if you go anywhere, start just by looking and trying to isolate some possibilities, landscape, portrait wise, and so on. But I've decided to start here, so that's the kind of view I want to work with. And I'm going to do some, I haven't done any thumbnail sketches, but I'm just going to start working on an A4 scale. And I've got some wash, diluted ink, and a sponge. I wish it was a bit darker, but anyway, I'm going to be combining wash with charcoal. So using my sponge, I'm going to put down some of these darker shapes. It's a single strength wash, and because I'm using a bit of sponge, it's all going to be pretty approximate. But these silhouetted shapes that I'm putting down, when they're dry, will give me a nice sort of tooth with which I can darken them with charcoal, possibly even add some chalk and some pastel. So, yet again, it's a way of starting with shapes, and I think it might be interesting to some of you just in relation to how you simplify something like a busy cityscape. All those buildings, I mean, they're kind of boring, but they're also quite difficult to manage. And if you can start with a kind of overall shape, tonal shape like this, maybe think of a certain amount of texture, if it's trees or if it's the sort of straight edges of buildings, and then drawing with the charcoal, it's possible to bring out, to select certain things to describe, to define a little bit more clearly. Now, my wash isn't very strong. I wish it was stronger, so I hope you can see it. But I did do one already, and since it's such a sunny day, it's dry. And I'm going to draw into that now with some charcoal. And although the wash can't be erased, the charcoal can be. So I could just introduce some lines, and I'm guided a bit by the shapes I put down first, but I'm not bound by them. And as I said, you get a nice tooth with the wash. I've got some watercolour paper here actually, so it is pretty textured. So I'm putting in some lines. I'm also, because it's such a sunny day, I think it's quite nice to get some of these shadows. I can smudge them. And so out of all that I'm seeing, I think because I've got this tonal wash established, to me it feels as though I don't have to draw everything. I can leave things out because they're connected by the wash, or because because the whole drawing is held together by the wash. So I can get from one, if you like, one interesting thing, or one thing that interests me, to another, and leave out the ones in between. And actually the weather's looking great because a lot of these buildings, which I have to say, don't really interest me that much, but they are all kind of turning into light and dark planes. So that at least gives me something to get a handle on. So that would be what I could do with that view. So I'll maybe pause and do a little bit more, and then see. Well, I'll maybe just get down to the trees and the bushes here, just to show you that I'm doing something slightly different with them. I'm doing all that with line, but I could equally have a thicker stick of charcoal, or use the side of the charcoal and build up something much darker. And because of this, particularly because of the tooth that you get from the wash, you can really make these charcoal darks almost black. And if you change your mind about them, whilst you can't rub out the wash, you can actually modify the charcoal. So you can subtract that. So that's a first version. Let me see if I do any more. I'll just try another view. So what I hope I'm demonstrating is a process of selecting. So I've built up a few more darker areas, and I can put in some lines, some definition. So what am I trying to draw attention to? If I add some more sharp edges to the castle, then that will probably stand out more. So that may be the castle that I'm drawing attention to, I'm adding emphasis to. Or it may be, something in the foreground like the monument. So just by adding definition, I draw attention in a selective way to certain elements of this subject. But I can also do it with colour. So let's get a little bit of colour into some of these buildings. And again, I'm hoping that what I'm demonstrating is that by building everything on top of this wash, it's all held together, and I just have to select through definition, through colour, through contrast, things that I want to bring out more strongly. And we get a little bit of and I suppose once you get into colour, it's not quite as straightforward as just putting on some defining lines. You then have to start to balance colour. But I think if you do it with selection in mind, what are you trying to show people, then you've got a kind of basis on which you will select things and bring them out. So that's that view, but I'm going to try one or two others that are, as I say, maybe a little bit less obvious, and where we can get a bit more of an aerial experience. So I thought I'd try this view, which is perhaps not quite so obvious as the last. What am I going to get? I want the hills and the university buildings, and then this big dark building in the foreground with the trees. It's not quite so picturesque, but I thought that would be more interesting, less obvious. I'll do the same thing, putting down the wash. So this is a really big dark shape here, which actually will be nice for defining the trees. And then we get a few little buildings, some nicer than others, and then we get the hills. And I don't know if you see St. Giles, I'll certainly get a steeple here and possibly a saint. No, I'm not going to fit it on anyway. So I've chosen this view maybe because it's slightly simpler, and I thought it might have the potential to be more interesting. Anyway, I'm doing different things using the same technique. What I'll do this time when this is dry is I'll work with the side of the charcoal, so I won't put in lines. I'll go on building up tone and texture, much in the way that I'm doing with the wash, and hopefully the wash, as I've described, will hold everything together. So I'll pause while that dries in the hot Edinburgh sun. That's dry now, and I'm going to work into it with the thick stick of charcoal this time and the eraser. It's really worth waiting for it to dry because it'll take the charcoal or the pastel much better, and you'll also be able to take off charcoal and pastel. You won't destroy the paper. So I'm using the side of the charcoal to build up some of these dark shapes which have been suggested, established with the wash. And I think this drawing is going to be a bit more tonal and a bit more textured. So I'm looking for different sorts of textures according to whether it's buildings or distant hills. And as with the previous one, it's really looking at how to select and simplify the city. I think that's probably the theme. Take something incredibly complicated like streets and buildings and select from them the ones that are interesting, attractive. I can't say the university is very attractive, but there's something in there. And use the wash. In fact, actually, the more I look, I can see the McEwen Hall. These might be things actually that I do end up wanting to make more of. But looking at ways of... First, I'm using tone to get some darker shapes to begin to define things. I think I'll probably want to use a bit of colour because those greens against the black are particularly nice. But I'm letting the wash hold everything together. So I might actually spray that. I mean, as I've been demonstrating, I can take off some of that. In fact, let's do that. We'll smudge that a little bit more and then we'll draw into it with the rubber, because then you really get these great layers. You get the layers of charcoal, then wash, then paper, and you don't always know what's underneath, so that gives you a lot of depth. And there may be places where I want to make things lighter than the wash, and then I can just put some chalk or some light pastel on top. So that's really good to smudge it and work in with your rubber, and then even go back, and really build things up. And as I say, I might actually spray it, because I think to get a bit more contrast in there would be helpful. And I don't want the dark to disappear when I put the pastel on. So in a way this has been a bit like sort of double tone. I've done the wash and then I've built up some really strong charcoal. And now I'm using colour in particular to start to bring out elements of my subject. And what am I after? I think this time I'm just after that light. the light in the trees, and maybe the sense of the distant hills. So I can use colour like that. I don't have so many buildings to deal with. So that's that view. I chose something that I thought was less obvious, and therefore I hoped would be more interesting. So I'm just going to go around the other side now and do a drawing of what's much more of a kind of aerial view of the city, where there's even more confusion to sort out and to select from. So I've come round the other side of Calton Hill, where we're looking across to the river, and it's a much more complicated view. It's a real cityscape without any of the kind of attractive skyline, but I want to work with it. I've chosen this direction partly because we can see the island as well, which I think is helpful. I think that's going to give me a sense of the scale of the city, but it's going to be interesting trying to select from all those buildings, all those streets. But I'm hopeful that I'll be able to use the wash and then the textured marks that I can make with the charcoal. It's pretty amazing actually what's going on down there. So that might be Leith Walk, I think. No, it's not. Actually, I don't really know where I am. But no matter, I want to get down to... I would like to have some of these buildings in the foreground here. That's Leith Walk, actually. That's the top of Leith Walk. And it might help my image to have a little bit of... I've got a low wall here running down the hill. I think to have something in the foreground I would find helpful. And as I've mentioned, the island in the background. And then it's just a case of managing everything in between. So I'm just choosing certain things, but I am trying to be observant in the perspective. But I'm not too worried about putting down the wrong shapes, because I know it's a process that I'll gradually refine. And this time I think what I'll do is I'll let that dry, then I'll do one more layer of wash, because I think that would be helpful to have a sort of double strength. So if I hadn't left the ink behind, I would have used a stronger wash, I think. But this is an interesting thing to try, to let the first layer of wash dry and then put some more on top. So when it's dry, it's less likely to lift off when you put more wet on top. So that if I combine that with putting on some charcoal as well, then I'm really beginning to work with layers. And I suppose what I'm looking for at the moment are some of these darker rooftops. But if I understand that by defining things I draw attention to them, I don't necessarily want to, or I certainly don't want to define everything. So that's just going to give me another layer of dark, which I've kind of superimposed on the first one. So I'll let that dry, then I'll do the charcoal. So in a way I think this is almost like the ultimate exercise in simplification. What do you do with all those windows? And I'm trying to give you a way in which you can put together a study where things are held together by the wash and where you can begin to select using charcoal, using colour, the areas, the elements that you want to make something of. So I did a couple of layers of wash, and now I've got to start sorting out what I want to feature. And there's plenty of scope for getting lost, so I'm just trying to see some of the kind of diagonal, horizontal lines that run through these streets, and there'll be a lot of adjusting scale and perspective, well, scale in particular. So that would be one thing. The other thing that I could do quite soon would be to superimpose a bit of colour. Just to help me sort out some of these areas, sort of moving from green shape to green shape. And there's the usual tendency that the things that you start to look at, you know, the island for example, tend to get bigger. So if you can have a process where you can build up some loose shapes and then still be able to refine them, and I think that is helpful. And really the interest, if you like, is almost in the foreground and the background. In the middle there's a kind of confusion which I don't have to sort out entirely. It needs to make sense, but it doesn't have to be, I don't want it to be too detailed. You know, that's the challenge, as I say, the ultimate challenge in simplification. So I'll be showing you, sending you some images with the email. I thought of a couple of artists, David Bomberg and Oskar Kokoschka, both of whom worked with some amazing cityscapes, London cityscapes, where in different ways Bomberg's work is very atmospheric. I think a lot of it was done during the war, and is quite abstracted really. He worked a lot in charcoal to simplify his subject matter, and then Kokoschka, who worked in oil paint and produced these, well, he was quite an expressionist really, so they are very expressive, colourful descriptions of London. So this is going to take me quite a while, sorting out what's what, but what I want to be helping you see is how you can simplify. And what I'm doing really is moving back and forth between foreground and background, and as I said, I wanted to have something in the foreground, the pathway, the wall, and something in the background, and I've got that, the island and the river, and then I'm gradually selecting out of what's in the middle. Some key buildings, I mean, it's, you know, the usual thing of looking with your eyes half closed, trying to move across the whole area. And I think what I would really like to include, you know, if I'm looking for anything in particular to show people, I think it's all these cranes that run through. So I think I need a bit of yellow, and I think they're going to be something that I'm going to have a kind of rhythm of running through the composition. So I'll be taking lots of photographs around. I mean, it's an extraordinary day and it's an amazing place to be, and I'm hoping that in what I've shown you here and with the photographs, or if some of you come on Monday, you can decide how much you want to work with the challenge of simplifying the city, or you might want to go for something a little bit more focused with some of these extraordinary views that we get up here. Okay, so I'll see you on Monday and have a look at what ideas you've found. Bye bye.